Well, thank you, Laura, for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yeah. So my name is Laura Forsick, and I live in Atlanta in the United States. And I am a huge space enthusiast. My background is in astrophysics and planetary science. And now I run my own consulting company called Astrolytical, where we look at space science, space industry, and space policy.
And you also wrote a book about space millennials, where you kind of documented interviews with 100 people from the millennial generation.
I did. It's called Rise of the Space Age Millennials, taking a look at how the millennial point of view is regarding space exploration and the future of space exploration, both robotic and human, and looking at how millennials interact in the workplace and what their work preferences are. I'm currently also working on my second book on space tourism and private space flight.
I'm looking forward to reading that one since I already owned the first one.
Great.
So as you were interviewing the people, how did your interview process mature and develop? I asked that because I'm interviewing people daily and I love to learn from your experience.
Sure. Yeah. So, um, what I did was sent out a blank questionnaire and had people interpret it any way they wanted to. And I was surprised at some of the interpretations to my questions, which led to some interesting diversions within the book because some people have more of a priority or a preference than others. And so they took my questions to mean different things. And so it wasn't so much that I adapted my interview technique because it remained the same. What I did was I adapted the way I thought about the questions and the way I interpreted the answers. I even added a whole separate chapter based on so when I was writing the book, I was writing the majority of it in 2019, which was the 50th anniversary of the landing of Apollo 11. And that got a lot of attention because a lot of the people of older generations remember it. They were there. They had that really great Apollo moment, but millennials were too young. There's no millennial that ever saw that, or Generation Z, and some Generation X as well, or Zen. There's people who have not seen it, right? And so, what caused people to be interested in space in the first place? So I didn't actually ask that question in the interview, but a lot of people responded to my questions in a way that I was able to gauge what got them inspired, what causes them to be passionate about space and space exploration and space science. Like, what is that spark? If it's not Apollo, because for most of us of this age, it's not Apollo. What is it? So in that way, I was able to take their words and use them despite me not asking that direct question. But I was able to gauge a really good indicator of how millennials were inspired to enter space.
And how has your understanding changed since publishing the book? Any new insights?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask because I'm actually writing a second edition of the book based on Generation Z. They were too young to interview. They were under 18 when I was doing the interviews for my book. So I'm actually now gauging the perspectives of the younger generation, those who are university students right now, or even recent graduates, and trying to get an idea of what their priorities are. And so just hearing the younger generation, it's almost like they're millennials even more so like just taking the trends that you see with millennials and applying them even more in that direction. And it's a beautiful future. It's a beautiful future of inclusion and diversity and equity and ethics and keeping those human questions in the forefront as we move forward in space.
It's funny you say that below 18 is too young to interview. I've actually interviewed people as young as four for my countdown to the moon thing.
Impressive.
So,
Oh yeah, there are many people who interview children. I just didn't want to go through the whole process of getting permissions for minors and all that, which I don't have to now because now we have a good group of Generation Z who are, over the age of 18 and well into their careers or into their studies by now.
yeah, one of the 4-year-olds I interviewed, I was asking him, so did you know that we were planning to send astronauts to the moon? And he's like, can I go to the moon? When can I go to the moon? And
Aw.
it's like he was really intensely focused on that. And then like 2 seconds later, he's like onto something else. I'm like, oh, that's why we're not back to the moon yet.
Well, I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, so I can understand their interests are all over, but their curiosity is top notch.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, it's like a laser pointer. It moves around a lot, but it's really intense on wherever it's pointing at that time. So when did you find out that we were planning to send people to the moon?
I'm not really sure how to answer that question because I know that I was inspired back when I was in third grade. I read a book about Apollo. So my teacher had us write short stories about going to the moon. So I'm not sure I wasn't convinced back in third grade that we were going to go back to the moon. I was automatically thinking, I'm going to go and this is what I'm going to bring and here's what I'm going to do. I know that when I started my undergraduate studies, I was already well versed in NASA and what NASA was doing. I graduated my undergraduate with an astrophysics degree, and I at that point I think it was the Constellation program that was going on under George W. Bush, and previously there had been another Back to the Moon program under George H.W. Bush, but I believe I was too young to really understand that one. But that Constellation program had me convinced that we were going to go back to the moon and we were going to go back with the Ares rockets, and of course those were canceled or resurrected under the current SLS program, depending on how you want to see it. And Orion still exists also. And so for me, I think it goes just back to childhood. I just assumed we would go back to the moon someday.
And so have you been disappointed that it hasn't happened yet?
I don't know if that's quite the question. I think I've been disappointed um, that we keep making decisions that delay progress. I think is where my mindset is, because it's okay to be cautious and it's okay to have other priorities within government funding. And I think that now is a better position to be in versus back during the Constellation program, because now with Artemis, it's more of a public-private partnership and it's more international. Whereas if you study the George H.W. Bush or the George W. Bush speeches or the literature that came out during those times, it's much more U.S. centric and it's much more government centric. It's essentially Apollo version 2, which is not what Artemis is. And so I actually believe that we needed to evolve our thinking and get to a point where commercial companies were able to participate more in order to be where we are today. So some of the decision-making processes, though, delayed that. There have been advocates of commercial space for quite some time, as well as skeptics, and some of those skeptics held things up. And I'm not just talking about skeptics within the space community; it's also the Congress and the presidential administrations and others who have had influence in funneling things towards a dead program or a very, very expensive program that's destined to be canceled, versus funneling things into some kind of more efficient mission. And of course, there are people who completely disagree with the return to the moon and they want to go directly to Mars. And that's a legitimate point of view as well. And so for me, I want to go to the moon. I have a feeling that I'm going to be too old by the time they're sending normal people to the moon, not just NASA astronauts, or I should say, not just government astronauts, since it's not just going to be NASA. But I am excited about the commercial space industry perhaps being able to take me someday to suborbital space or even to orbit, probably not ISS, but maybe the next commercial space stations that are going to be up there. So I think everything just takes time.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. That's come up in a lot of my interviews too. How people feel is for certain that we're going to be going to the moon, but they'll say things like maybe in my children's generation or my grandchildren's generation. And I was reading Alan Ladwick's article, book, "See You in Orbit," where he kind of chronicles, kind of his experience with space flight and what have you. And the people in the Apollo generation, the sense I get is they all felt like it would happen in their generation, like it was just around the corner. And what do you think has really caused us to kind of stretch out our expectations?
Reality. Um, so back during the Apollo program, they had a political reason for wanting to accelerate the progress to the moon, and that ended up not being sustainable. It was too expensive, and the political motivation ended once the Cold War ended, once the Soviet Union fell, or even to say once we, the United States, landed on the moon, that political motivation disappeared, and you could see that they had planned additional Apollo missions that were canceled. And so The difference now is being able to go sustainably. And that was actually one of the things I touched upon in my book. I interviewed people like, what is the best method of going forward? Is it flags and footprints? You land there, you plant a flag, and you say you've done that, and you move on. Or is it something more sustainable and slow paced? And I think the majority of people wanted to see either a combination of the two or something more sustainable. And that is the key word right there that Artemis keeps using, is sustainable. And sustainable can mean many things. Sustainable in terms of finances. So you don't want it to be 100% reliant on government funding, and especially not US government funding, because government funding is fickle. Depending on the Congress or the presidential administration, things could be canceled at a drop of a hat. Right now, we're trying to figure out how the Biden administration is going to move forward. It looks like they're supportive of Artemis, just not in the 2024 time scale or timetable. And we've got another government example, which is the Chinese government, and they have their sites, and they're not so wishy-washy about it because they are more of a dictatorship or an oligarchy. So they have that constant philosophy, and so they can move forward in the long term, but they're also going slowly. So there's two different methods there of moving forward with governments. But if you really want that kind of sustained program, you need it to be commercial. You need to have some kind of profit making return on investment. Hopefully it's not just tourism. Hopefully it's some kind of real commerce that can exist between cislunar space and Earth, or cislunar space and the moon, or other planetary bodies, or lunar surface, whatever it happens to be, whatever becomes this next, stepping stone to the rest of the solar system, because it's not just moon, right? I love the moon. I want to go to the moon, but that's not the stopping point. Neither is Mars the stopping point. We want to get out farther and farther, as far as we can, as far as we want to. And so you need to make sure that there are those, the infrastructure and the political will and the financial will and the business will and the public will. And so with public will, you need to make sure it's safe, and you need to make sure you're sending probably a better representation of humanity, and not just the people that we've traditionally sent to the moon. And so you have to think about all these things in context. And I've already lost what your question originally was, but I think now is a great time to be moving forward with this more sustainably than it has been in the past.
Yeah, indeed. And you talk about why we're going to the moon, flags and footprints. Landing the first woman on the moon is something that is a great soundbite. But just like the flags and footprints, once you've had that first landing, people are likely to go, well, mission accomplished. Why? I mean, as you kind of think about the reasons for the Apollo program, what's more surprising is not that we stopped going after Apollo 17, but rather, why do we have an Apollo 12? Because it looks like we were just doing victory laps at that point.
I think that there's really great science to be had on the moon. We didn't understand hardly anything about the lunar surface and the lunar regolith when we first went there with Apollo 11. And so I do believe that science is a really vital reason to go to the moon, and not just lunar science, but Earth science and solar system science, because the Earth moon system is so interconnected. We can really learn so much about Earth and the formation of Earth and the evolution of Earth just based on the moon, because the moon doesn't have the erosion that Earth does. It doesn't have oceans. It doesn't have an atmosphere for with wind. It doesn't have plate tectonics. So we can learn so much about Earth and how Earth was formed and how it's evolved over time based on the moon. And I believe that they had those science goals in mind when they initially went with Apollo 11, Apollo 12. I can't really pretend to know what those true motivations were, why there were several Apollo missions. But I think at some point also the public got bored of it. The public was cheering them on for those initial Apollo missions. But once they got to 13, if 13 hadn't been such a dramatic disaster, how many people would have cared at that point, right? And so you can carry on with the science, but public opinion matters too when it is government funded. Public opinion does not matter so much when it is privately funded. And so if you're talking about a government funded mission for either entirely government funded or primarily government funded, the public opinion matters, because the legislators have to prioritize taxpayer money depending on what their constituents want, right? And so I imagine that the people at the time making those decisions said, we have this capability, let's continue to use it for at least a little while longer for public opinion, for science, for political will, for whatever the reasons were. I hope that there are similar reasons and additional reasons now with Artemis that keep us going further and further into the future.
Yeah, and it's most of the interviews that I've done with non-space people, just going out to people at Starbucks or on the street or what have you, asking them, did you know that we're planning to send humans back to the moon in 2024? The vast majority of them, I would say 80%, say they have no idea that that's happening. And today I was watching the White House press briefing, just the segment when the press secretary was asked about Artemis, and it really didn't seem like she was aware of it either. And I was just wondering, how much of the population do you think is aware of our plans to go back to the moon? And, back to your point about the need for public support, is that important?
It's important with government funding, yes. It's important when you're talking about a mission that is going to be reflective of what the governments are trying to do, which is either education or science or commerce of the American people, or whatever government is that is going to be investing. We've got several international partners. The press secretary did know that there was a program, but she wasn't briefed on it, so she couldn't answer the question. But that does give to the point is that now in the first few weeks of the Biden administration, that is not a top priority, and no one expected space to be a top priority. Space is never a top priority in a sense when it comes to making those kind of political decisions, unless there's an alternate reason like the Cold War or national defense. And so I'm not at all surprised that the majority of the general public does not know, because NASA has not done the best job at promoting it. And there's also so much other attention on other things, rightly so. We've got a lot going on nationally and internationally right now. And priorities maybe should be on a global pandemic and some of the other things that we think about on a day-to-day basis. I think that the public will start paying attention when it happens, because we've gone through this before. We've gone through this talking about programs that are then canceled. And anybody who's paying attention at all might be jaded to think, oh, sure, they say they're going to do that. I'll believe it when I see it, right? So perhaps once they start seeing humans land on the moon, or even just going around the moon, I think that'll change public opinion. I think another thing that'll change public opinion is commercial companies doing it. If you've got, for example, the SpaceX Dear Moon project, which I don't believe will actually fly when they say it's going to fly, but I do believe that it will eventually fly. And that is a public mission of artists to fly around the moon. And people will pay attention to that because Elon Musk gets a lot of attention. He's a popular figure. Just the concept of artists flying in space instead of professional astronauts, that is, there will be professional astronauts as well, but the crew being mainly artists, I think that will get a lot of public attention. So moving away from the whole nationalistic point of view of exploring the moon because we are a nation and that is what we do, but more like we are humans, and the human story is what people care about. And so how does that touch on humanity? What are the artists going to bring back or paint or draw or sing or whatever it is that they do when they go there? Or if it's not artists, maybe it's another mission that goes to the moon and it's international. I think they've selected a Canadian astronaut to join NASA astronauts to go around the moon for Artemis 2. I believe that's the one. And so how is that international aspect going to be, that cooperation between Canada and the United States, or the United States and ESA, or any other international partner that we have? People will pay attention to that. Another thing to think about is commerce. If it's decided that there really is a lot of money to be made mining the moon or doing some other kind of commerce, I think people will pay attention to that because money speaks, and especially people who think that they can support that. And watch it get into the public domain in terms of entertainment. Because once it subtly enters entertainment, then the public is paying attention. They might not be talking about it directly, but they're paying attention to it if they start, making more movies or TV shows, or which we have seen more of lately, more Mars than the moon. And they have done public opinions that think that people are more interested in going to Mars than the moon, by understanding that the moon is a stepping stone to Mars. So just watch how it enters the, pop culture, and I think you'll start to see how it influences the general public.
It's kind of interesting about space and the pandemic. I keep thinking if we had cheap, personalized spacesuits, then we could pretty much handle any pandemic. We just all walk around in our spacesuits. But
Well, I don't think we want that. I think we just better handle it with vaccinations and everything else, so we can breathe the air instead of breathing a tank.
sure. Talking about entertainment and private space flight, uh, any thoughts on Space Hero, the plan to have a reality TV contest to um, select a citizen astronaut to send to the ISS for 10 days?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. Space Hero is not the first one to have this idea. We've seen this repeated several times in the past and it hasn't happened. But if they're able to make it happen, if they can actually select somebody who enters a contest, who captures people's attention through a TV show or whatever it is that can gather people to rally behind someone and to see someone reflected in them to then go to the International Space Station, I think that's a great idea. We're seeing similar types of contests with the Inspiration4 mission. That two contests there to have two seats open up for a free flying mission with SpaceX. There have been several other concepts like this as well. Russia is trying to do a movie in space where they're talking to any woman of a certain age and height to see if they can have her as an actress to go to space. So this is a universal idea based on the fact that people want to see the common person, not just the elite of the elite, but the common person themselves, maybe, or someone they know, reflected in space travelers. And I believe that once we start flying suborbitally, people will start to see that because more and more people will start to fly suborbitally before they can get to orbit, before we can get to the moon. That's the first step, is to fly people in suborbit, because then you'll see more and more normal-ish people. And I say normal-ish because these are still wealthy individuals, but more normal, so quote unquote, people flying in space. And maybe that will encourage other people to really think about seeing themselves in those seats, seeing the Earth from above, and all the beautiful things that can happen with the overview effect.
Um, don't mean to put you on the spot, but did you give the St. Jude's yet?
Oh yeah. So I have a personal reason for wanting to defeat childhood cancer. I lost my sister at age 4 to leukemia. So whenever a cancer, or especially a childhood cancer charity pops up, I am all over that. So I've been not only donating to St. Jude's in support of the Inspiration4 mission and hoping that I get selected as well, but also promoting that as much as I can to encourage people. Maybe whoever's listening right now, if it's still the month of February 2021, you can still donate for the Inspiration4, but if not, please support St. Jude and other fantastic charities like that, because space isn't just for rich tourists. Space isn't just for the elite. Space is really to benefit life on Earth. And I've had several jobs where we use space technology or we use space data to benefit life on Earth. You can talk about the physical science, and you can talk about like medicine and biological science and how all these things can benefit life on Earth. And I'm not saying we can find cancer cures in space, but if we can use that money or use the publicity of space to help cancer research, I'm all for that.
So they're planning to raise, I mean, they would like to raise $100 million for St. Jude's through people donating through the Inspiration4. What are your thoughts? Is that a realistic number? And
Oh yeah.
what if we like double or triple that? It seems like that would really encourage other people to run similar types of promotions.
I hope so. So I know that they have a Super Bowl ad that they're going to air. And I think that the more people they can reach, and people are very excited about this contest. Unfortunately, it's limited to United States persons, but I think even globally, yeah, people are going to be paying attention to this and can replicate it in other situations and with other charities.
So when do you think you'll actually get to travel into space, assuming you don't know the answer to that question by March?
Okay. So yeah, I'm sure hoping I get chosen, but if I'm not, because I'm sure there's a lot of entrants, I am personally hoping to get a suborbital flight at some point in my life. I was really inspired. A colleague of mine, a person I look up to, Alan Stern, was selected. He had championed this for years. So it was natural that he was selected to be the first NASA-sponsored scientist on board a Virgin Galactic flight. And I think that seeing scientists in those roles, and I myself am an astrophysicist and planetary scientist, so I myself have lots of experiment ideas that I could do in space, whether it's suborbital orbit or wherever it is, on the moon. Send me to the moon, I'm a planetary scientist. Wherever it happens to be, I believe that science can really benefit from having scientists in space. And I've already talked about the benefits of having the normal person and the artist. I'm going to talk about science for a moment, because when you have scientists doing their actual science, they can change it on a whim. They can see things that other people can't see. Right now, the astronauts are trained as scientists in a way by the scientists on the ground to be the proxy scientist in space, following directions that are given to them from mission control, with training previously before they launched, which is great. And I'm glad that we do fantastic science in space. But if you actually have those people who have developed those ideas themselves, who can really understand it backwards and forwards, who can change things on the spot, who can come up with new ideas right there and then, imagine what we'll learn. Imagine what we'll see. Robotics is, inexpensive, and robots can go where humans can't, but robots can never replicate the human mind and the human agility, or at least not for quite some time, hopefully. And so we're at a point where humans are still actually more cost effective to send as scientists doing our own science. So that's what I want to do is I want to be a scientist astronaut and go up in space, whether it is suborbitally, whether it's with Virgin or Blue or some other company, whether I go to a space station in the future, I would be all over that. Again, send me to the moon anytime. So hopefully within my lifetime, I would also like to be able to purchase seats to send my kids up, just for fun of it. I don't think it'll be, my husband doesn't want to go, but I think maybe by the time my kids are old enough, maybe when they're my age, I don't know, they might want to go, and maybe they'll have the ability to go as well.
When you find out how to convince your husband, please let me know because I have some family members I have to convince too.
No, I think it's okay for have people to stay on the ground. Even to this day, some people are afraid of flying and they're just fine driving. It's not vital that everybody needs to go to space, but I think what is vital is that everyone needs to have the option to go to space and access to space data. So you're talking about satellite data, or some means of sending an experiment up or research up or something, so that everybody can have that access, because it shouldn't be limited to just the certain countries or certain elite people or certain wealthy people. I think that opening it up to globally, even if people don't physically go, I think is very beneficial.
And you mentioned something about having the scientists actually in space, kind of reacting to the space environment. And this is something I've been kind of exploring and struggling with in our effort to get the most out of astronaut time by making sure that every moment's accounted for. I've often wondered if we're actually squandering it from the sense of how many scientific insights have come from like like a flash or a gut feeling, and if you don't have the freedom and time to actually have that in space, we might be missing out on some really true insights.
Yeah, so spaceflight is still extremely expensive, and therefore they have to manage the astronauts' time just to have that wide number of scientific experiments done in the time allotted. And it's not just science; it's also maintenance and chores and exercise and all the things that astronauts must do. But if you have more people sent up, and this is one reason why I'm an advocate of private astronauts going up to the space station, is because they are not just going to go to sit around; they're going to go to do experiments themselves. And so the more people you send up to space, whether it's space station or free flying or another space vehicle, a space platform, or a lunar base, which hopefully we'll get there, the more that science can be done. And you're right, the more people can dedicate time and not feel so rushed, because the work will be spread out. And sooner or later, it won't be like, you have 30 seconds and go, 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 which is what my experience was doing zero G flights. There's a company called Zero G Corporation that does parabolic aircraft flights. And I had 25 seconds per parabola, and it's go, go, go. There's no time to think. Everything is pre-planned because you have no time to think. So getting away from that mindset and having a more leisurely pace, getting to something like, an analogy is the Antarctic bases, where they have months that they stay in Antarctica, where they can do the scientific experiments. It's a harsh environment, so they don't necessarily want to stay for very long, but they can at least have their time to work things out. And I think that is a good example of what we could do in the future with either orbit or moon or Mars.
Well, Laura, I really appreciate you taking some time out to talk to me. It's been a really wonderful conversation. I know we're coming up on the 30-minute mark, but is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get a chance to?
So I think patience is one thing that we need to learn as a society, and also as a community. There are some things that just cannot be rushed, and human spaceflight is one of those things. And we just finished the memorial services, annually reminding of the people that we've lost, Apollo 1 and Columbia and Challenger, and just being aware that human lives are on the line. And initially, it's people who signed up to have their lives on the line, right? It's test pilots and government astronauts and the wealthy who have signed lots of waivers. But eventually it's going to be the point where it's going to be a lot more lives. And so it'll be much more like the aviation industry, hopefully, where you still have that risk. And there's still a lot of things to take into consideration. And we still have so much thought and care into aviation, such that if there is an accident, we take care of it. So I think patience is something I'd advise. I myself also would love to get to the moon in 2024 and Mars in 2030, 2035, none of that's going to happen because we need to take our time and make sure that we're going safely, but it's never going to be fully safe. And we need to be aware of those risks and acknowledge that everybody is going to be taking risks. And so you can't ever mitigate them away. People are okay with risking their lives, let them do it. So there's a balance to be had. Patience. I'm hoping that we get there in the next decade. That's what I'm aiming for.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Laura. I hope you have a good rest of your day and look forward to being in touch.
Thank you. You take care. Good luck with your interviews.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.